Hello and welcome to this edition of Takeaway Tuesday. I'm Andrea Chamberlain and I'm here with Kim Madden, and we are both trainers and forensic interviewers at the National Children's Advocacy Center. We're really excited today to talk to you about making that decision to end a forensic interview. And Kim, I think oftentimes as we go through forensic interview training, we talk about closure, but we don't really, and we can't within a foundational training, really cover all the different nuances involved in when do we end a forensic interview and what are the different elements. So what would you say to interviewers when it comes time to this decision making?
That's a great point, because it is decision making, and it's really a place in the interview, I think we would both say, where you have to have some good critical thinking, kind of thinking about what you had at the beginning of the interview, what the concerns of your multidisciplinary team were, and then to make an assessment of how that child has done in the interview, how they've done cognitively responding to questions, how they seem to be doing emotionally, they seem distressed. So there's a lot of things involved. So I think to try to simplify this, you and I talked and we kind of broke it down into 3 categories, right?
Right. And so one of our first categories is looking at maybe neurological or developmental. And what we came up with as we were kind of brainstorming is that sometimes when we come into an interview, the child is just not able to understand our questions. And maybe that is due to some sort of developmental disability, or maybe they're just really young. And so if they're a 3-year-old or 4-year-old, maybe a young 5-year-old, they just may not be where they're at developmentally to understand our questions. And what we often say, it's not just understanding the question, but then can they conduct a memory search? And then respond in a way that you and I can understand in the interview. I think some children might have that receptive language, so they might understand the gist of the conversation or the question. But when they come back and they're talking with us and we are really struggling to understand, we're not going to be able to conduct a forensic interview.
We can try maybe some alternative communication, like can they provide a written response? Or do they use a communicative device that we are familiar with and feel confident? That's the big if. So if the child is considered nonverbal, a different type of interview is needed. And we will give you some information about that in the info print. But you're right, because we have nonverbal kids. We also have children that may have some neurodevelopmental impacts, and those can all interfere. And I feel like for these kind of cases, Andrea, these are the things that we're pretty much become apparent to us in the pre-substantive phase. So, and maybe we have a bit of a cue from the pre-interview information we've gotten. But then we also have like another category that we call motivational. And those are things that may also be apparent right from the beginning. You think about the child that sits down and you just ask them how they are and they stonewall you or curl an expletive. You're like, So it's that extreme reluctance. And they may be unable, unwilling, or just are having a difficult time answering any questions. And as I said, sometimes you can go along the pre-substantive phase and the easier topics for the child, the rapport building topics. You don't see that reluctance, but when you make that transition, then that becomes very apparent. Sometimes it's apparent, though, in the waiting room, right? Because the kid, what?
Well, they can be sitting there, they can be angry, they can be hurling the explicitives, they can, in so many ways, indicating that I don't want to be here. I'm not going to engage in this process. This is not what I want to be doing. And we try. We always attempt to bring them back if they'll come with us to the interview room. But it doesn't mean that that will move forward. And also, I think another category that we look at, and this is generally with the younger children, but when they indicate within their verbal responses, oh, I need to go see mom, or I need to go take a bathroom break. And you let them take a bathroom break, but then they continue to want different bathroom breaks, or they may say, are we done yet? How many more questions do you have? Which is indicating I'm done. And I do think it's so important that we as interviewers, and I kind of think, all right, if a kid has said that 3 times, we are done. And we're going to try, I have just a couple of more questions for you. Never give them a number, but a couple of more questions for you, or we'll go check on mom or dad in a moment. But if they continue that, what they are saying is that interview is not going to happen today. And so if you can step out and check in with your team and have a dialogue, but we can't force children to stay in the interview room. And maybe, we hope that we get enough for child protection if there is some issue that is needed or some information that's needed. But we have to pay attention. This is a child-led process. We have to make it okay for the kids.
We absolutely do. So I think we've covered the neurodevelopmental, the motivational, but then we also run into these situational.
Yes.
And I think there might be some overlap between these categories.
Definitely.
Situational. So those are going to be things like perhaps the child was doing okay, and then they do experience a great deal of retrieval distress when they start thinking about past experiences of maltreatment, and it prompts, say, a mental health emergency. They start to become very dysregulated, very upset. Or perhaps in the course of the interview, and really at any time, the child has some suicide ideation. They talk about wanting to hurt themselves. Also, there are times when the child has a medical emergency. I've heard you talk about interviewing a child and they had a seizure.
Yes, and you stop because you have to take care of that child. And I think with all of this, it goes back to this is a child-led process. And if a child is having a mental health issue that needs intervention, and that intervention should not take place with the cameras rolling. That's not appropriate. And we do need to shut the interview down. Or if, again, we have that medical emergency. Again, just it's a child-led process. One of the other things, Kim, that we talked about is those children where they come in and they have the ability to dialogue with us. They can understand our questions. They can give us a response that we understand, but they continually focus on kind of fantastical elements that they're adding into the interview, such as I karate kicked him and he fell out the window and he died. And this child is 6, and you know that did not happen. So what would you say to an interviewer when they have this child that they just can't move off? Because if you ask those children, oh, did that really happen? They're going to say, yes, it did.
Yes. Don't do that. I think oftentimes that fantasy that might represent how children wish they could have responded. But yeah, something sounds like a fantastical element, like you're saying, I chopped his head off or I threw him out the window. Yeah, you don't want to do then the open question.
No.
Tell me all about that.
Do not take that and don't follow that.
Because you really, you're going to risk diminishing the child's credibility at that point.
Yeah.
So we don't want to do that. I think you want to make an attempt, maybe a couple of attempts to redirect and see if you can get that child realigned, change the topic. Maybe sometimes you can change the task. If you've been talking, maybe you can say, okay, draw me a picture of what it looked like, but try to refocus them.
Right.
But then if it persists, then I think, again, check in with your team. The conversation may be, okay, we've gotten enough information to inform our next steps. And so we close out the interview. It's also those kids where, and maybe it's, Andrew, because we are all very concerned based upon the reported circumstances, but maybe nothing has happened to this child.
That's true. Always something we need to keep in mind.
There might be a concerning interaction that was witnessed, but the child didn't encode the abusive nature of it. So I know you and I talked for myself. I can get stuck in those interviews, particularly if there is like a witness and it looks like something.
Lots of red flags.
Yeah, lots of red flags. But just, again, when you've tried some different angles, and repeatedly you're running up against this wall. I think, again, it's a conversation with your team, but think about ending that interview.
Not every child is going to be interviewable every day.
They're not, and that's the key. They may be interviewable on another day, which is what we have to talk about with our teams.
Yes.
And of course, the best case scenario for ending an interview is what?
It is when we have a child that can dialogue with us, they're able to share with us their experiences, and we have gathered information about maybe 3 to 5 well-remembered events. And that's always jurisdictionally determined. Have that conversation with your prosecutors. For us here in Huntsville, it's if we have 3 to 5 well-remembered events, our prosecutor is happy, and we're not going to continue to get one more. Let's stop on a great note, and let's leave the child, and we're where we need to be.
Absolutely. We've been talking about those episodic details, those semantic details a lot during this season of Takeaway Tuesday. Yeah. And I think finally, what we have to always remind ourselves and the rest of you out there is that we hope that your metric for success as an interviewer is not disclosure.
Oh, please do not let that be a metric. We have heard that from interviewers before, and it goes back to one, maybe nothing has happened to this child, which is always a great day. And maybe today is not the day the child is ready to talk with you, or maybe they've not made a disclosure before they're brought in and they're not going to be talking with us. So if you think or you believe or your team that, you have to look at, are you a good interviewer? And that depends on how many disclosures you get. Then one, you're setting yourself up for failure, and maybe even the child and our ability to protect that child.
Yeah, absolutely. Much more realistic, I think, your metric for success is, did you make a connection with that child? Did you attempt to make that connection?
Did you give them the space to be?
To be, yes. And hopefully children leave, no matter how they've interacted with you, understanding on at least an internal level, at least, that there are people and places that care about them and the things that have happened in their lives.
That is true. Well, thank you. And thank you for watching. And we will see you for our next episode in the future.
Absolutely. And thank you for everything you do for the kids in your community.